Good morning. The October 27th, 2021 meeting of Haliburton County Council is now in session. Warden Liz Danielson presiding.
Good morning, everyone. Mr. Rutter, if you could take a roll call, please.
Warden Danielson.
I am here.
Councillor Moffat.
Present.
Councillor Roberts.
Present.
Councillor Kennedy.
Present.
Councillor Burton.
Present.
Councillor Ryle.
Present.
Councillor DeVolen.
Here.
And Councillor Shell.
Present.
Thank you.
And could I have a mover and a seconder to adopt the agenda for today? Councillor Shell and Councillor Roberts.
Moved by Councillor Shell, seconded by Councillor Roberts. Be it resolved that the October 27th, 2021 Haliburton County Council agenda be approved.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Is there any declaration of pecuniary interest or general nature thereof today? Hearing none, could I have a mover and a seconder to adopt the minutes from September the 22nd and the special meeting of September the 29th? Councillor Moffat and Councillor Ryle, thank you.
Moved by Councillor Moffat, seconded by Councillor Ryle. Be it resolved that the minutes from the September 22nd, 2021 regular meeting of County Council and September 29th, 2021 special meeting of Haliburton County Council be adopted as circulated.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Well, right into the big item of the day, shoreline preservation and a draft bylaw. So we'll bring in our consultants. Good morning, gentlemen. And I see we have our planners, Mr. Stone. Before we get started, I just wanted to say that there really has been a lot of work done by an awful lot of people on this file. Council, staff, our consultants, interest groups, lake associations, there's really been a rather extraordinary response, and from the public, which is most appreciated because that's what we really needed to help us guide us through this process. I know that it has not been absolutely perfect, but I think we've gone a long way in getting the information that we need to help us make a good decision. And speaking of decisions, we still have a few. So I'll look to council after we hear the consultant's presentation to help decide how we're going to move forward after this. So welcome, gentlemen. Today we have Jason Farragon from JL Richards, Brent Parsons from Hutchinson Environmental, Garang Kandawal from JL Richards, and we have our planner Steve Stone with us as well. So over to you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Warden Danielson, and excuse me, members of council. We're very pleased to have the opportunity to meet with you this morning and to present to you the outcome of, as Warden Danielson has sort of said, the community's collective effort to take the next step in terms of advancing a shoreline preservation bylaw potentially within the county. So perhaps I can ask Mr. March to call up the presentation. What I'm hoping to do, Warden, with your permission, in the short time that we have today, realizing, of course, that you have squeezed us into a regular council agenda, would be to go through a very brief presentation, which kind of encapsulates the work that we've done in the last couple of months, and then walks through some key features of the bylaw. So if that's okay with you, I'll just jump right into things.
Okay.
Awesome, thank you. Mike, if we can go down to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, in the next sort of 10 minutes or so, what we're hoping to cover with council is just to sort of the road that we traveled, if you will, over the last couple of months. So what we're going to do is begin with sort of, the questions that you've asked us to help you consider. We'll then sort of go back to the conversation that we had in August. And at that time, we had presented the results of our preliminary assessment on both the scientific literature review and the policy side of shoreline preservation. At that time, we had identified some opportunities for improvement, which you had asked us to give some further consideration to. So we'll start there. From there, we'll talk about the outcome of that analysis. We'll walk through some of the key features in the draft bylaw that you have before you this morning. Of course, and touch on some other service enhancements. And by this, I mean sort of the communication and the education side, which is a fundamental piece of the service level change that you're considering, as well as potentially incentives as well to assist people with the renaturalization of shorelines across the county. And then, of course, we'll wrap up by sort of talking about sort of our key conclusions and our recommendations for County Council's consideration. Mike, if we can go down to the next slide, please. So County Council will certainly recall that when we first met in May, you've asked us to sort of assist you with a 5-month-long journey and conversation with your community to examine the good work that you have previously done with respect to a shoreline preservation bylaw within your community. And what this slide shows is the work plan that Council had initially approved in May. And the 2 red boxes that are down at the bottom of the slide sort of connect back to where we were in August, so that is task 10. And we are now at the final task, task 13, so our final advice and recommendations to you. And as the warden had mentioned, within the last 2 months, I would sort of say that many individuals, stakeholders, residents, associations, county council, county staff, and our team, I'm fond of the saying, move heaven and earth. So we've moved heaven and earth in order to sort of get here to you today with our final report. And as part of that process, as County Council knows, we went back out and we consulted with your community on the key opportunities for improvement in the shoreline bylaw itself. So we went out and we did conduct a second round of one-on-one, what we're referring to as stakeholder interviews with representatives from the development community, as well as some environmental organizations, county councilors, local municipal staff. We held a wonderful open house last month, and we had a number of people, I believe it was 8 individuals, come forward and provide us with their perspectives, both on the shoreline preservation bylaw and some of the options that were under consideration as well. And then, of course, we've conducted a second community survey. And as County Council will recall from our last discussion, the community survey is a participatory survey. It isn't a probability survey. So it is reflective of the views of those who complete the survey, but it isn't necessarily representative of the views of the community. So we had iterated that in our first report to County Council, and we're reiterating that again. But all in all, a really high level of engagement is what I would describe, and we've been met with wonderful feedback and wonderful suggestions and opportunities for improvement. In the rest of our presentation, we won't get into the public feedback as we did the last time, but I just wanted to reflect and to sort of say, as you step back from all of the feedback that we have received, as we've described in our report to you this morning, I think the key themes remain the same. And I think what we've heard from your community loud and clear again is that people obviously understand and they value the lakes. And they're concerned about lake water quality, but there still is some variability in the community with respect to the need for shoreline preservation, its priority within the landscape of opportunities that exist to preserve lake health within the community. And there's still varying opinions on 30 meters setback versus 20 meters versus 10. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. We go down to the next slide, Mike, please. The other piece that I wanted to call County Council's attention to as it relates to the community survey. So we've indicated that it isn't a probability survey. But as we were going through the process, we came to the realization that the software that we were using had a technical constraint associated with it that allowed individuals, depending on the browser software that they used, to complete the survey multiple times. And while we were going through our process, one of your residents had shared these images with us. So on the left-hand side of your screen is a post from one of your community organizations that was attempting to promote the survey. And on the right-hand side of the screen is a screenshot of the subsequent conversation in response to that post. And as you'll see there, residents had understood that there was a limitation associated with the survey, and they had suggested certain actions, excuse me, to each other. So I want County Council to understand that because I believe that that represents an additional limitation associated with the survey results. So I don't want to dwell on it, but I just wanted to call it to your attention. So if we can go to the next slide, please, Mike. So when we last met in August, at that point in time, our team had identified what we were describing at the time as 9 opportunities for improvement in the bylaw, and these are listed on the screen. I won't repeat them because I know that we're obviously part of a broader agenda today. The items highlighted in blue, of course, are the things that we sort of drill down into with the community and as a consulting team as well, and with your staff. The next slide, Mike, please. So in terms of the outcome of the additional analysis and the consultation that we've conducted within the last 2 months, and considering the opportunities for improvement that we talked about in August, our report recommends firstly that County Council proceed with a 30-meter shoreline preservation buffer. The rationale for that being is that that is consistent with the in effect framework that you have in place today, that is consistent with County Council's official plan. It's consistent with the lower tier official plans as well as the lower tier bylaws, and certainly consistent with the tree preservation bylaw that you have in effect today. And again, as we talked about in August last time, you have a very mature shoreline preservation framework in place. And the proposed amendments to the bylaw that we're going to discuss today as well are really designed to add site alteration into that equation to help you achieve your public policy outcome of preserving a shoreline buffer on all water bodies within the county. So that leads me to the next point, the area of application. You know, the last time we talked about should this apply to lakes, rivers, and streams, should apply to ponds and natural features. And I think as we went away and we thought about that question a little bit further, and we looked at other municipal practices elsewhere and looked at your policies and talked to your community, I think we're here to recommend that the bylaw should apply to not only lakes, rivers, and streams, but ponds, if I can use that term for now, and we'll talk about what a body of water means in a second, as well as natural features, and that is consistent with municipal practice elsewhere. In our last discussion, we talked about, you know, which matters should be referred to County Council for consideration if there is a dispute or if a service level, you know, isn't met for one reason or another. And so we're recommending that that matters can be referred to County Council within 3 instances. And we'll talk about these as we go through the bylaw, but generally these would occur when a service level hasn't been met by your staff, when there is a dispute around potentially a condition of an approval, or if someone is refused in terms of their application. And then lastly, and we'll talk about transition as well, but at our last meeting, we talked about the various options for transition towards new bylaw requirements. And we talked about, well, you know, you can use time, you could look at geography, or you could look at application-based requirements. And again, as we reflected on that further and looked at successful municipal practices elsewhere and spoke with stakeholders in particular, there was good support for an application-based approach to transitioning towards the new bylaw requirements. And really that support existed because it was viewed as a way for the community, and by community, I sort of say community with capital C, and I'm referring to community as well as county staff in this particular case and the county as an organization, that there was strong support for an application-based transition system because it was regarded as a way for the community, capital C, to grow into the bylaw requirements over time. So we have taken a first shot in the draft bylaw to describe to County Council how a model like that could work. Of course, everything can be improved, and so look forward to the conversation on that, but we are recommending an application-based approach to transition. Mike, next slide, please. So in terms of the bylaw itself, somewhere within the 827-page report that we have tabled with you this morning, and our apologies for that, but we felt it was important to adequately reflect you know, all of the public comments that we've received. We just wanted to sort of walk through some sort of key features to help you as you're sort of digesting, I think, the information that we're bringing forward to you this morning. So in terms of where the bylaw applies, what we're recommending is that the bylaw applies to shorelines, which is a defined term within the bylaw, which in turn connects to 2 other definitions, the body of water and high water mark. I won't go into these this morning, except to say that what the bylaw is saying is that you should continue to use the existing framework that you have and continue to apply that framework to a 30-meter setback buffer area from the high water mark of bodies of water within your community. Next slide, please, Mike. I'm going to skip order a little bit. Instead of going to the prohibitions, I'm going to go to the exemptions next, because I think it's, it's important to understand where the bylaw doesn't apply in order to understand where it does apply. So looking at the bylaw itself, what we're recommending is that from a site alteration perspective, the bylaw would not apply if a resident was proposing to alter the grade of land by 0.3 meters or less. So that represents approximately 3 feet. That is, a relatively modest standard. In the bylaws that we've looked at, that number can be as low as 1 inch, and it could be higher than 0.3 meters. So that is a public policy decision and a judgment for county council to make, understanding the pros and cons, I think, of those different sort of distances, if you will. The bylaw is not intended to apply to minor landscaping. That is a defined term within the bylaw. So if somebody wants to go out and, plant their garden bed or, extend a bed potentially, then the bylaw wouldn't engage on those sorts of matters. It is not intended to apply to situations where people are undertaking normal activities on their properties to maintain existing landscaping. And then the third, then is maintenance or replacement of existing features. So we built a provision into the bylaw which says that anybody that is maintaining an existing feature within the landscape that is on their property today is exempt from bylaw requirements. So the question becomes, what is an example of that? Well, let's sort of say that somebody has already built a path down to the water, or they have created a platform in the space between the shoreline and their residence to sit. Maybe they have a fire pit, something like that. And if that structure or if that facility requires some form of maintenance, they can go ahead and do that. The intent of the bylaw is not to capture those types of situations. In terms of trees and vegetation, we have largely continued the existing exemptions that exist within your shoreline tree preservation bylaw and carried them forward into this bylaw. So the bylaw would not apply to the removal of any trees that are less than 5 centimeters diameter base height. It would not apply to good arboricultural practices, I always have a tough time getting that word out. It would not apply to good forestry practices. It would not apply to emergency work. And with climate change, this is a very real consideration as we're looking at more increasing intensity of storm events. So if you have a major windstorm that comes through your community and it happens to damage trees along the shoreline area, folks can go in and do the work that they need to do to ensure that their property is safe. And the bylaw would not apply in an instance like that. And then, of course, the bylaw would not apply to removal of vegetation within that 30-meter shoreline area for up to 25% of the vegetation along the frontage of that shoreline. So we are providing a good deal of flexibility within the bylaw for folks to create viewing windows and those sorts of things to ensure that they can create a relationship to the water that is appropriate for them while still balancing the need to preserve the natural characteristics of the shoreline and the ecological benefits that it provides. And then in terms of general exemptions, the bylaw, we talked a lot to your development community about this, as well as your local municipalities, and lots of discussion about, when a planning application comes forward, how does it relate to the site alteration bylaw? How does it relate to work that a contractor is doing to achieve a building permit? Those sorts of things. And so what we're recommending in the bylaw essentially is that if anybody is undertaking any activity under an approved building permit to achieve that permit, and provided that activity is lawful, and I want to talk about that and what that means, because that's an example of a performance-based standard, that they can proceed with that activity. And the requirements of the bylaw would not apply. And we've used specifically the term lawful in this instance because we've heard from your development community about concerns about how they would balance previous setbacks that were in the previous draft bylaw with other legislative requirements that they need to meet. And we recognize that that can be a challenge, which is why we've moved towards more performance-based language in the bylaw using the term lawful. And then the other piece that we've built into this, and this relates to the previous slide as well, and we've talked about this, is as County Council continues to move ahead with the framework that it has in place today, there is a need to recognize that not all properties are able to meet the 30-meter setback standard. And that could either be for, topographical reasons, it could be existing development, it could be lot characteristics itself. And so what we've done in the bylaw is introduced a term called a lesser shoreline. And the lesser shoreline is designed to provide immediate flexibility within the bylaw to properties that are unable to meet the general requirements of the 30-meter setback. And so the language in the bylaw begins to set out what those parameters would look like. And it recognizes that those instances occur, that is okay, that folks can continue to do work on those properties, all provided that there is a report that we're describing as a site evaluation report, which is quite common standard practice across Ontario, of a report type that is used in a situation like this, provided that there's a site evaluation report done. And whatever is done at the end of the day results in a net benefit, I guess is the way of describing it. And that would be subject to in the opinion of the director, informed by the intent of the bylaw itself. So the director has some real tests in the bylaw that he or she needs to ensure are met when sort of rendering judgment on those types of unique situations. Next slide, Mike, please. So that's what's exempt, and then so what is then captured? Well, it's everything else beyond that. So larger scale, higher risk type activities. The bylaws bringing forward your sort of legislative authority under the Municipal Act to regulate changes of grade through site alteration, and it's basically adding that in with your existing tree preservation bylaw. And so what this slide describes is sort of the prohibitions within the bylaw. Won't dwell on those because I think you're sort of very familiar with what those look like. Next slide, Mike, please. So in terms of the administration of the bylaw, when we last met, we talked about permit-based systems and non-permit-based systems, and we've had an opportunity to reflect on that and again, consult with your community. And we're here today to recommend that the county move forward with a permit-based system for shoreline preservation within the community, essentially. And what this slide describes is in the bylaw, we're setting out what that application process looks like, all of the parameters around that. We've given some thought to potential conditions that could be affixed to those types of permit decisions, as well as how the appeals system would work. And so I've talked about that. I don't want to talk about that again. But I think what's important about this slide, and it's a change that we're recommending based on feedback that we've received, again, from your development community. And it relates to capacity within the community to help achieve the outcome of the bylaw and the community strategic objectives within the bylaw to preserve shorelines. And one of the things that we've heard quite clearly was that folks were concerned about being able to find qualified experts within the community to be able to help go through that permitting process, if you will. So on one hand, we were hearing that. On the other hand, we're talking to stakeholders and we're talking to county staff about the possibility of the county certifying individuals to work underneath sort of the bylaw. So this is a very sort of familiar model for municipalities in Ontario. And so if the person isn't, say, a professional engineer, based on their qualifications, skills, and experience, and the education that they receive from the county, they then become certified as a sort of shoreline preservation contractor, for lack of a better term, under the bylaw. So what we've done in the bylaw is we've introduced an expanded term, qualified persons, which is highlighted here on the screen. And what we've done is we've bolded the change that we're recommending being made. So an individual with equivalent knowledge, skills, and experience to prove by the county gives the county some discretion in terms of who can prepare the plans and the applications that are required under the bylaw, again, to achieve that strategic outcome based on community capacity and based on the county certifying those individuals. And as County Council knows, I've come to J.L. Richards. I was the former director of planning for the city of Greater Sudbury. And this recommendation in particular reminds me a lot of how we used to do lock grading in Sudbury. And in that case, we had certified lock grading professionals who could do lock grading work within our municipality. And in that case, our municipality maintained the certification. We monitored activity to ensure that folks were adhering to the high standards that have been expected of our council. So if County Council goes down that road, that provides County Council with an opportunity to create a very similar system. If we can go to the next slide, please, Mike. So I guess the next key piece then is transition. As County Council gets into the bylaw, what you'll sort of see both in the application requirements as well as the section 13 on transition What we've proposed essentially, as I've mentioned earlier, is an application-based transition model that allows the community, capital C, to grow into the requirements of the bylaw. So what we're recommending is that, subject to County Council's feedback and approval of the bylaw, that in year 1, applicants would be required to submit what I'm going to describe this morning as a simplified application process that doesn't necessarily require a certified or a licensed expert to prepare that plan, to submit it to the county, and the county would then issue a permit for that. And what we're recommending is that there be no fees attached to that for those first year applications. So again, we're sort of imagining a system where folks are applying, they're gaining some experience with what the requirements are. The county is gaining some additional experience and capacity with working with that system, and there isn't any money associated with it from a fee perspective, at least. And so the community goes through that process collectively. They pause and reflect after that first year of implementation. You may wish to fine tune the bylaw, based on what you learn at that point in time. So we're recommending that first year, that 365 days in that simplified permit system. And then what the bylaw contemplates is then that the community would then move into a subsequent phase of implementation where more fulsome application requirements are required in order to submit that application. So that is one way of how transition can work, and certainly welcome County Council's feedback on this. There are some judgments to be made here around, I think, the duration of time, what goes into that simplified application, and whether or not fees are required. And so obviously happy to take any questions on that. Next slide, please, Mike. So those are some of the key elements of the bylaw. And when we last met, we talked about service level enhancements. And I think at the time I suggested that, adding site alteration into your existing shoreline tree preservation bylaw really represented a service level enhancement for the community as you continue to protect shorelines in Haliburton. At that time, I think the feedback that we received from County Council was, that's great, but when we look at service level enhancements, we need to look at a broader host of services, including communication, education, and incentives. And we acknowledge that. And so although it was a little bit outside of our scope, what we did is we went and we did some research. And in the report, we've provided County Council with some really great examples, we believe, of existing resources that are available for the county to then, pick up, adapt, and use within Haliburton. And I think the underlying assumption there and statement is that the county is a trusted source of information, and the county should continue to remain a trusted source of information. And by looking at the available resources that are there, you can adapt them, and I think quickly sort of develop a communication and an education strategy. Now, in terms of incentives, there's many different ways to do it, but what we've described in the report as well, of course, we're planners, so we can't help but to describe the planning tools that are available. So we've talked to you about Section 28 of the Planning Act, and that's community improvement plans. And community improvement plans are a very powerful tool. And if you look at the legislation, essentially what it says is a municipality can identify a community improvement project area for any economic, environmental, or social reason. And once you do that, you can then prepare a plan to help incent whatever activity you want to see within that area to occur. So in the past, we've talked about the renaturalization of shorelines. So thinking about that, thinking about the incentive mechanisms, and thinking about the policy framework for that, the CIPs is one opportunity for County Council to consider to achieve, again, that strategic outcome and help augment or deliver a more fulsome service when thinking about shoreline preservation moving forward in the future. So last slide, I believe, Mike. So in terms of conclusions and recommendations, we do recommend that County Council continue its 30-meter shoreline preservation buffer. We do recommend that 30-meter shoreline preservation zone apply to all bodies of water in the county as defined within the bylaw. We're recommending that the county consider moving towards a permit-based system in order to administer this new framework, that it rely on an application-based approach to transition, certainly expand the number of matters that can be referred to council to ensure that those principles of natural justice are achieved. And Madam Warden, those are our recommendations. As we've identified in the report, we're certainly, looking forward to getting County Council's feedback on the bylaw. I know it's a big report, and then what we're sort of suggesting in terms of next step is subject to your feedback and your direction, that the bylaw be updated, that it certainly undergo a legal review before being brought forward to County Council for final decision and approval. And then the county move forward from there. So with that, Madam Warden, I'll stop. I'm sure County Council may have questions of me or my colleague, Mr. Parsons and Mr. Kandawal. We're certainly happy to take those questions and provide any additional information that County Council requires in order to make whatever decision it intends to make today. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That's a very succinct report, given the number of pages that we've got. I've got some strange message on my computer here. So I guess that there's a number of things that we need to talk about. I'd like to offer an opportunity to council to ask any general questions that you have about the presentation that we've received so far. As you'll see from the report, there are a number of options that we are going to need to discuss. And I want to see what County Council's feelings are. I think I have a pretty good idea about whether you want to try and have that conversation today or to set a special meeting, give ourselves a little bit more time to absorb the magnitude of information that we've got before us, and to talk about the options that our consultants have given us. Just a couple of notes before I ask for questions. One of the things that everyone has been asking about to date has been a sort of a set of Coles notes for the document, for the bylaw itself. But of course, that can't be prepared until we've landed firmly and made decisions on some of the options that we've been given. So that's something that is still on our plates to follow. And just a note to either Jason or Mike, it would be very helpful for members of County Council to receive a copy of the presentation that Jason has given us today, and to make that available to the public as well. So I would look to questions, comments, thoughts from Council. Councillor Schell.
More of a comment than a question. Just, yeah, I definitely loved that Reader's Digest version today. We just received the sorry, my dog's barking. Received the 800-page document a couple of days ago. I know I personally have not had time to go through it. It's something I would like to look at sort of more of a line by line, and it's great, but I'm not sure that I would be prepared today. Well, I know I wouldn't be prepared today to make a decision.
I had no intention of asking anyone to make a decision.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Councillor Roberts.
Yes, thank you, Warden. Yeah, I too really was just raptured with your slide deck and following along, and it helped explain a lot of things. One thing that over the weekend, well, first of all, I'm having vision trouble, but that'll be corrected soon enough. So that was hard and challenging to read over the weekend, but also to know from where we started with, say, the first draft or the draft that you had to review to where you got. So I wasn't sure what some of the differences were, but in your slide deck, I do see a lot of that explanation. So as the warden suggested, that we set aside a special meeting, and I know how much our CAO loves to do doodle polls, and our schedules are wide open, so that shouldn't be a problem. But I really do think I need a little bit more time to digest. I have people that I know want to bounce ideas back off me, that members of the public that have read it over the weekend. So I would support a special meeting on this. But if I can just ask one further question, something I had mentioned to Jason the other day, which was about the permitting system on lands on a shore road allowance that the owners perhaps do not own because they haven't purchased a shore road allowance. And Jason, maybe you can just explain how that process would work, how the local municipalities would have to get involved if someone was looking to permit on land that they don't own.
Yeah, so through you, Warden, I certainly appreciate the question, and I think this is maybe even an example of the need for the next stage in the discussion. So I think when you look at the bylaw today, we had contemplated a scenario where somebody obviously owns property, but the shoreline road allowance intervenes between the property and the high water mark. And so how would that apply? And in writing the bylaw, as we were drafting it, the intent would be that the way that the bylaw is framed, the owner can come forward to make an application. The term owner is very broadly defined. So an owner could be a municipality in that particular case. So if somebody is interested in doing that, then they would have to seek consent from the lower tier municipality in order to make that application to then, undertake whatever changes they're proposing to make within the shoreline road allowance. So that was the intent. But here is the example of, I think, the next level of detail that needs to go into it. When you look at the bylaw, and I think it's in section 3, what we're saying is, notwithstanding anything above in terms of prohibitions and exemptions, that no one is permitted to alter, integrate, or remove any vegetation in a prohibited area. And then when you go into the definition of a prohibited area, it talks about a road allowance that's owned by a municipality. So there's an example, I think, of where we need to go back into the bylaw and make a better legislative connection between the two to ensure that the intent is sort of really clear. But the intent would be, as I've sort of described, that an owner would have to seek the consent from the lower tier municipality in order to do that work within the shoreline road allowance.
And I believe that each of the municipalities have some fairly strict limitations about what they allow on shore road allowances that are owned by municipalities. Go ahead, Councillor Roberts.
Just to follow up, so maybe with the director of planning on screen, maybe he can talk to the 4 local planners to see how to streamline that. I know just even something simple, nothing is complicated this, but in a sign bylaw, we ran into a little glitch where somebody was doing commercial work in Dysart and they got a sign permit from the county because it was on a county road, but didn't realize that they needed to also get a sign permit from Dysart. So it's just that communication between the 2 municipalities to make sure that's streamlined and not complicated. People are looking to cut red tape, if you will, and make sure that is seamless. They don't want to be held up from a local municipality waiting for the permit from the county.
Other questions or comments on the presentation today? Councillor DeVolen and then Councillor Kennedy.
Yeah, just thank you for the process. I mean, it's been a long haul, but I think there's a lot of information here for ourselves and the public to digest. I think regardless of where we land on this, I think with the avenues that have been shown in the appendices here, whatever, there's been, unless you've been asleep under a rock, any individual or party that has wanted to have input in this, this has been a good and open and transparent process. So I want to thank all, including the warden and staff, that for this process. And I agree that we set aside a day to slog through this with no other distractions on our agenda, and we may need more than a few days from now till then to pick a date, and I'm sure the doodle poll will ferret that out. But I think this is a landmark thing within Haliburton County. This is of no small importance. It has the bearing on what's going to happen for the foreseeable future, and it's challenging regardless of what we decide. It's going to not make everybody happy, but as I said to my children when they were younger, just because you didn't get the answer you wanted doesn't mean you weren't heard. And I appreciate all of the comments and questions were there from all of the parties to the best of their ability that are included there. So any individual that did submit something or has a particular perspective, we've all over the last year and a half, I see it captured there. And I just want to thank you for the process and look forward to refining it with my colleagues here in County Council. And let's make a decision and roll on. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Rael.
Yeah, I have to echo what everybody else is saying in terms of this process. I'm not exactly sure that I've drawn any conclusions in terms of finite decision today. I'm sure we're going to do that over the next short period of time. But I can tell you one thing, thanks to the group that has assisted us, I have a much better understanding of the pros and cons of what we're dealing with, the ramifications of doing something or not doing it. So I thank you very much for that. In many cases, we were dealing strictly with lobbyist opinions or just the left and right. And I think you guys have brought a tremendous amount of clarity and some intelligent detail. Obviously, you were not able to tap into every single resource that was available, but I think you've given us a good cross-section of what we need to know. And for that, I thank you very much. And I look forward to the second phase of this program, which would be to come up with an effective bylaw.
My apologies, Councillor Kennedy, you had your hand up and I let Councillor Ryall go before you. So go ahead.
Not a problem, Madam Warden. Yeah, a report that I'm finding in some areas clear, in other areas quite confusing, only having a couple of days to go over it. So I definitely support a day or more to examine this more or less page by page with your input. Saying that, I do have a number of questions that maybe there are clarifications. I would just ask that we be permitted to correspond directly with you to clear those up, and that may be all that's required. I have pages of them actually, so I'm sorry about that. But some may be very simple to answer, and some may not be. But I would like to forward that on to you and get some answers before we sit down for the next meeting, which may help speed things up. Thank you.
I just, the only comment that I've got to make about that, of course, I mean, we need to get all of our questions answered, and it's recognizing that unfortunately you're having to do some catch up, Councillor Kennedy, and it makes it a little more difficult for you. The one comment I did want to make and let everyone know that this is the end of the terms of the contract for our consultants, and it's my feeling that we have spent enough, we've spent so much time and put so much energy, and there's been so much involvement from the community that some additional costs associated with another meeting or completion of Cole's notes is something that I believe that we probably would all accept at this point in time. You know, for the cost of another meeting, for responding to inquiries and possibly helping us with completion of the bylaw. So just to keep that in mind, Councillor Moffat.
Thank you. Yeah, I continue to have a lot of questions. They're primarily clarifications, and did exactly what Councillor Kennedy is looking to do. I did send, I think it was, I played 20 questions with Jason. And he was kind enough to take some time to answer them. That doesn't mean that I won't ask them again next time we meet, because I think it's important for everyone to understand the questions that have been asked and answered. A lot of my questions are in relation to what you just said, Madam Warden, about the end of the scope of the contract with the consultants. There's a lot of, you know, who and with what money and under what timeline, and who's going to do the work. And I don't know whether we're expecting Mr. Stone to do a lot of the stuff, but there's a lot of connecting of the next step dots that seem to me to be in no man's land. And so that will form a number of the questions that I have when we do our thorough review is, that's great, but who's going to do it and when, with what money and in what timeline? So I think we need to have regard for those kinds of things going forward. And I look forward to the next conversation. So thank you.
I would look to Mr. Rudder to see if you have any comments or thoughts at this point in time.
No, I don't think I have much to add. I would say that with respect to Councillor Moffat's comments, I think in order to really discuss, sort of what resources are required to implement a bylaw, we really, I think we need a firmer understanding of what will be in the bylaw. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg conversation. So as we move forward, we've certainly, as we've prepared a draft budget, we've included some resources in there, but it's really a placeholder number. And once we get a better sense of the direction County Council is heading with the bylaw, we'll be in a position to say what resources are required to implement and support that.
Any other comments or questions from Council? Well, I'd like to thank you, gentlemen, for the work that you've done for us so far. I know that it has been a bit of a rocky road for us all, and I also know that you and maybe possibly in particular Garang may have taken heat, from people who are passionate about the subject, and we appreciate your patience and professional handling of the heat that may have been associated with that. Councillor Moffat, then Councillor Roberts.
I just do want to circle back on the one slide about the survey and just express certainly I'm sure it's everybody's disappointment that folks would try and find a way to, scupper that process. And additionally, that some have chosen to take comments provided by the public as contained in today's report and try to use it against them. So once again, we said before, the divisiveness and infighting amongst friends, neighbors, and associations that has occurred. I've never seen anything like it, and I hope it never happens again because it's been exceedingly disappointing. I'll just leave it at that. But I think it needs to be acknowledged that there's some folks who are choosing to engage in a really inappropriate and ineffective way.
It's made it just that much more difficult for us all, and it is disappointing. There's no question about it. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you. This may go to sort of what Mike said. Yeah, we can do a placeholder for setting aside some resources in the proposal. Year one is a simplified service, if you will, or a simplified application process with no fees in year one. But and maybe it was in the document, pardon me, were there samples of when we go forward and you're not sitting at the table with us, of what fees we should be charging for an application? And more importantly, I know it's going to be hard to believe, but every once in a while someone builds without a building permit, not a whole house, maybe just a garage, whatever. It happens. Then there's more penalties for that. So not only the fee for the permit, but the penalty for work, etc. So was that in the document as an example of sample fees? And is there different levels? Oh, sorry, just to add to that, is there different levels? Someone wants to just do this little job, like building permit fees. Building permit fees are based on square footage, and etc.
Yeah. So through you, Madam Warden, no, we hadn't included that information in the report. It wouldn't be difficult for us to go back to the research that we've done and look at the municipal precedents to benchmark where county council may wish to set a fee. So that is one model, as county council knows, to set fees, is to look at your comparable jurisdictions and position yourself within that landscape. Your other choice is to, I think, take, and that approach has its limitations, speaking from experience. Your other approach is to look at an activity-based accounting model. And there's different degrees of detail that you could look at when doing activity-based accounting to deliver a service. But the activity-based accounting then, I think, gets more clearly and squarely at what you're looking for, Councillor Roberts, which is something that is tiered based on the complexity of the application, because more complex applications, as county council knows, typically require more effort from staff. And so that's another model. Then the third and final point that I would sort of add is, then I think as part of that decision-making process, and all councils, when sort of setting user-based fees within the province, need to make a decision about how much cost recovery they're hoping to achieve through that. So you're looking for 100% cost recovery, or are you going to proceed with some lower number and quote unquote subsidize the application process, if you will, in order to achieve the public policy outcome? So that is another consideration to keep in mind when sort of setting a fee for this new bylaw.
Any other questions? Councillor Moffat.
Thank you. I wonder if Jason might take a moment to explain to the everyone else what he had explained to me. One of the questions that was asked in the is about municipal comparators and what other folks were doing, and that they did reach out to other municipalities. We saw a partially completed chart that they were continuing to work on, and disappointing results. So I wonder if it would be okay if Jason explained that, because that was something we asked for and we don't have it, and maybe he can tell us why.
Yeah, so through you, Warden, happy to answer the question. So Council will recall the last time we got together in August, at that time we had reached out, I think it was to 10 comparator municipalities, to understand what we were describing at the time as successful municipal practices. So let's go beyond the paper, let's actually understand how the service is delivered and what are the pros and cons of those service delivery choices. At that time, I think we had connected with one municipality. Subsequent to that conversation that we had in August, we reached out to all of those municipalities again. And rightly or wrongly, fortunately or unfortunately, we've heard from one. So in terms of the response that we got back, it was we were somewhat surprised, but I think it's a reflection on how busy municipal administrative staff are today, especially in the planning world in the province of Ontario, dealing with the continued uncertainty of COVID and return to work and all of those things, while trying to deliver a service remotely and delivering a service where there's increased activity levels. So I think the lack of response isn't a reflection of those that we reached out to, but I think it's just the context that they find themselves in. So they're challenged to find time, and therefore challenged to find time to call us back and get into the more deeper discussions about service delivery choices and effectiveness of those choices.
That's unfortunate. I know that municipalities historically have always been really good about sharing of information and practices. So it's, as you say, reflective of the time that we're in and the challenges that we're facing right now, but disappointing nevertheless. Any other comments or questions? Well, once again, thank you, gentlemen. I'm sure that we will be in touch again. I'm trying to set up a subsequent meeting. So I would look to a mover and a seconder to accept the report for today. Councillor DeVolen and Councillor Burton.
Moved by Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Burton, be it resolved that Haliburton County Council receives for information the October 22nd, 2021 report on the proposed county shoreline preservation bylaw from J.L. Richards and Associates and Hutchison Environmental Services Limited, and that a meeting be scheduled to do an in-depth review of the draft final report.
All in favor? That's carried. Okay, moving on in the agenda, we have a motion before us to approve the reports and recommendations from the Committee of the Whole meeting. Before we read or ask for a mover and a seconder, are there any questions about that report? Hearing none, could I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Moffat and Councillor Ryle. Thank you.
Moved by Councillor Moffat, seconded by Councillor Ryle, be it resolved that the recommendations from the October 13th, 2021 meeting of Haliburton County Committee of the Whole be adopted by Haliburton County Council.
All in favor? That's carried. Nothing from joint accessibility. So next up is planning, and Mr. Stone is still with us. So we look to you to give us your first year planning department update.
Thank you, Madam Warden, and to the rest of council. It's exciting news that our bathymetry project is moving ahead. We now have 2 contractors out doing the survey work, and we're hoping to have a third signed up to do another project later this week. With regards to some of the local planning matters, we've just gone through appeal periods and no appeals on a couple local official plan amendments. And so those decisions will be signed by the CEO, hopefully later this week, and then sent to the township clerk. And Land Division Committee has been on, for November, we'll have, I believe it's 6 applications that will be considered by the committee. So we're excited about that as well. So thank you.
Any questions on the planning update? Councillor DeVolen?
Yeah, just want to thank current and past staff and members of council about floodplain mapping and all of that's involved. We've moved the needle a long way. And I'll tell you, it was the principal reason that I picked the time to get involved with municipal politics. And certainly with our LiDAR mapping, as that rolls out and some of these other analysis that we'll do. I'll also comment that in the month of October, with flooding in the village of Minden, they had a small submarine, remote control submarine, that they were mapping the channel from the Minden Dam to Gull Lake. And again, just another element of the final pieces of us being able to do with changing climate and weather patterns and adapting both infrastructure and operational parameters so that we remove or limit the threats or the byproducts of this crazy weather that becomes more and more common. So just on all of those things, just a huge thank you on behalf of Minden Hills, and particularly those of us that live in town that seem to reap the whirlwind when we get some of this weather. So thank you.
Could I have a mover and a seconder to receive the planning department's update? Councillor Shell and Councillor Kennedy.
Moved by Councillor Shell, seconded by Councillor Kennedy. Be it resolved that the October 27th, 2021 report on planning department projects be received for information by Haliburton County Council.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Next up is a request for extension for a draft approval.
Yes, Madam Mayor, reps of council, thank you. The request has been received for a project that's sort of in its 11th hour in terms of clearing conditions. The Dysart Council approved the extension yesterday, and we received that notice this morning. So I actually have the final set of drawings on my desk to review. So we're hoping between now and the spring to have final approval granted for this subdivision, but because of the time frame, it's due to lapse in November. The applicant asked for a safety net of another year for that extension. Thank you.
Are there any questions or comments about that request? Hearing none, could I have a mover and a seconder to approve the extension? Councillor Roberts and Councillor DeVolen.
Moved by Councillor Roberts, seconded by Councillor DeVolen. Be it resolved that the October 27th, 2021 staff report on the request for extension of draft approval of plan of subdivision file number 46T12001 be received for information by Haliburton County Council, and that Haliburton County Council amends the approval of the draft plan of subdivision submitted by Catherine Gonson for lands located in part of Lot 33, Concession 6, Geographic Township of Dysart, part of Lot 1, Concessions 5 and 6, Geographic Township of Dudley, now in the municipality of Dysart et al., to extend the lapsing of draft approval to November 24th, 2022.
All in favor? That's carried. Okay, and finally, under planning, the appointment of an alternate forestry conservation officer. I think this is something that we have done in the past and fairly standard. Are there any questions about that, or is there any comment you'd like to make about that, Steve?
You are correct, Madam Warden, that it's standard practice. Thank you.
Could I have a move and a seconder then to approve this appointment? Councillor Moffat and Councillor Kennedy.
Moved by Councillor Moffat, seconded by Councillor Kennedy. Be it resolved that Haliburton County received the October 27th, 2021 appointment of an alternate forestry conservation officer staff report, and that Haliburton County Council appoint Ryan Adams as an alternate forestry consultant and bylaw enforcement officer to provide enforcement and public information distribution services with respect to the County of Haliburton Forestry Conservation Bylaw number 3196 and Shoreline Tree Preservation Bylaw number 3505, and any amendments thereto, weed inspection and other bylaws as deemed necessary for the period of October 27th, 2021 to April 1st, 2022, and that the necessary appointment bylaw be presented for consideration.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you.
Actually, Warden Danielson, could I ask, make a request? Could we strike the dates out of that? So that would save us from having to redo that appointment in next April.
Are there any concerns about doing that? Seeing none, it sounds like that's just fine.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is the correspondence listing. Two pieces of particular correspondence that council may want to comment on. One is the resolution supporting further infusion of funding for long-term care homes, and the other is the a piece of correspondence from the Glamour Lake Cottage Association. Just as a note, the Glamour Lake Cottage Association had made a statement of concern about the bylaw and asking us to put a hold on making a decision. I don't think that they were in support of the bylaw, but they have since had some considerable clarifications on questions, and I believe their position may have changed. But any comments or questions, any thought to support either one of these pieces of correspondence? Councillor Real?
Now, I think it's extremely important that we look at that long-term care thing, because we've got it here, and it's an issue right across the province. So if the rest of council would be in favor, I certainly wouldn't have any problem supporting it.
Would there be a seconder to support the long-term care? Councillor Roberts? So I believe that we have a resolution prepared for that.
We do. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council receives for information the October 8th, 2021 correspondence from the municipality of Leamington regarding long-term care homes, and that Haliburton County Council supports resolution C 279-21 passed by the municipality of Leamington at its meeting on September 14th, 2021. And finally, that staff be directed to forward a letter indicating council support.
All in favor? That's carried. And we have a resolution to receive the correspondence. Could I have a mover and a seconder for that? Councillor Moffat, Councillor Burton.
Moved by Councillor Moffat, seconded by Councillor Burton. Be it resolved that the correspondence listing for the period of September 15th, 2021 to October 20th, 2021 be received for information by Haliburton County Council.
All in favor? That's carried. Next up are several reports that I believe that we would bring our director in to address. Is Robert here?
Yes.
Good morning.
Mr. Sutton.
We're also bringing in Sil, our manager of operations, to join me with as we have 4 reports that there may be some questions from
Okay.
council.
Morning, Mr. Cloutier.
Good morning, Madam Warden and members of the council.
So first up is the rail trail status report.
Yes, good morning again, Warden and Council. So with our October Rail Trail status report, a number of topics in it. We've addressed that we have our ongoing maintenance activities. We've replaced some culverts, continue to do that as the season draws closer to winter and snowmobile season. The Haliburton County Roundtable had its first meeting in over a year, early October. And one of the requests from the roundtable is to report back to council regarding the current contract, but granite screenings versus limestones. We've provided some history in the report as to that it's been a long-standing tradition of putting that material down. But we also really wanted to assure council that it is an acceptable product. So because there's those 2 ongoing contracts with the ICIP project, we really address that information. Sil and I are continuing research with other organizations, other municipalities regarding the limestone versus granite screenings, and we'll address that further so that can be covered in the master plan update as part of the roundtable. With the roundtable, we do have another meeting scheduled at the end of November. That's November 26th. And I guess the rest of the report does deal with the status of those ICIP items. With those ongoing contracts, we're about a couple weeks away from substantial completion. So that's completing about 29 kilometers of the trail with selected base repairs and granite screenings over that entire distance. The last 2 items, the accessibility improvements, as well as the interpretive signing, with the county receiving the transfer payment agreement and with the understanding that we have till 2027 to complete those works, we're recommending that we slow down a little bit and get the resources that are coming very shortly with our new Director of Tourism and Economic Development, so that we can ensure that those items are addressed properly. And we plan to carry the money over into next year to make sure that they are addressed properly. And they are, as council has noted in the past, particularly interpretive signing, will be similar to the shoreline protection. There's a lot of interest in the public, and there'll be a lot of opinion and decisions to be made on what signs to put where. I think that kind of covers the whole idea. I guess one of the last parts is the climate change regarding the granite screenings and limestone. We had our climate change person do a quick calculation just for council's benefit. It's about 50 kilometers one-way distance between the different pit locations between limestone and granite. So therefore, that's about 100 kilometers per truckload of screening. So for about 1,000 tons, we're looking at a number of, what would it be? Oops, I've got misplaced the, we're talking about 1,900 liters of diesel. So therefore, there's a significant greenhouse gas effect of importing a non-local material. Hopefully I've covered a number of questions there, but we're open to answer any questions that council may still have.
Just one point of clarification on our meeting date, which is the 25th, Thursday, the 25th, not the 26th.
Oh, thank you, Warden.
I'm assuming it's on a Thursday, not on a Friday.
Yes, you are correct.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you. And thank you for this detailed report on the work that's being done on the rail trail, just being finished up. The dilemma of granite screenings and limestone screenings is sort of seems to be an ongoing one. I know that we in Dysart have used granite screenings on certain trails, Head Lake Trail throughout Glebe Park, and also the little bit that from Haliburton Crescent to Industrial Park is granite. It is compacted. It is, you couldn't ride a bike. It is compressed and compacted. I walked the rail trail from Ritchie Falls towards Ritchie Falls Road the other day. I did a circle around that area. It's sand. It's not compacted. You feel like you're walking on a beach. So it's, you literally cannot ride unless you had a fat bicycle with those mega tires, which most people don't, just the average bicycle. It actually made it not even that greatest for walking. So I don't know, are there different levels of granite screenings? Is there some that have more sand in it? It's one thing, since I've been on council, I've never fully got the aggregate thing and the measurements of stone. But what we have in that section has so much sand in it that it is not, you cannot ride a regular bicycle. So that is the problem. We're saying we're putting down granite screenings, but what kind?
To the warden and to the councillor, I'll ask Silda. He's got very good local knowledge, and I'd like him to address a little bit there, because you could have been in an area that isn't finished or requires some additional work.
Yes, so that section was from Ritchie Falls Road, where the falls actually are, up to County Road 20, County Road 1 intersection, correct? Okay, that section has received screenings in the past, and it was three or 4 years ago that section was completed, and it's going to receive some more this year as well for the surface. So it should compact because they're using a roller to compact it after it's applied. So
go ahead.
All screenings are essentially the same. They're very close in it's a byproduct of producing a clear stone. So the quality of material is very close to the same, regardless of produced.
I appreciate that, and we can talk more at the round table. But you know, I'd be happy to meet somebody on the sections of rail trail that I'm referring to. Sil, maybe yourself and I, we talked about that, but I'm just explaining the experience that I'm having there, and trying to understand how come I can walk from Halbium to Industrial Park Road on granite screenings that have never been replaced for probably 10 years. It's hard. It's fantastic. And there it feels like you're walking on a beach, which would be nice if I was really walking on a beach, but I'm not. I'm trying to walk recycle on rail trails. So
Well, and that's an extremely valid concern. I mean, we're trying to see more active transportation and cycling, and if it's not, hang on there, Councillor DeVolen, we'll get to you. It's obviously it's something that we need to discuss further. So go ahead, Councillor DeVolen.
Yeah, for point of clarification, having been to the areas in question multiple times, can you let us know when the work is done and completed in the particular sections? Because to analyze and look at it where they've done some of the substrate work and whatever, that they haven't put the final screenings in, compact them, and drawing a conclusion, I think can be misleading. Having said that, if you come back, Robert and Sil, and tell us it's done and it still has the elements that Councillor Roberts is, then obviously it's not as intended or desired. But certainly when they're done, to let us know, so then we can analyze it ourselves and see if it's satisfactory or not.
Oh, and this is obviously something that we're going to need to have further conversation about and some clarification.
No, yes, thank you, Councillor and Warden. And Sil can point out local issues where there are sections, as Councillor Roberts was noting, where there's sections of the rail trail that are extremely well compacted and are very, very hard. So that's one of the points in the items, is that both types of materials require maintenance and proactive maintenance. So we are looking at ways to make sure that we address a consistent surface, from north to south for the whole trail. So thank you, Councillor DeVolen, to say let's look at it when it's done so that we can address if there's still outstanding deficiencies. The idea of this section was just to ensure, because some people were concerned we were wasting money. We wanted to address those concerns, that we're not wasting money in our opinion, and the materials should be very sufficient. However, if limestone might be used in ongoing sustainable maintenance, that's still open to be determined and will be addressed as the roundtable. So we're just trying to decouple those two issues just to alleviate any concerns and further steps to go forward.
Thank you. Any other further comments on the rail trail report? Could I have a mover and a seconder to receive it? Councillor Robertson, Councillor DeVolen, thank you.
Moved by Councillor Roberts, seconded by Councillor DeVolen. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council receives for information the October 27th, 2021 rail trail status report, and that the Haliburton County Council approve the proposed budget allocations as noted in the report.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Next up are the winter maintenance agreements.
Yes, thank you, Warden. This is just the yearly agreements. I understand it's been through everyone's respective councils, and so I'm not sure if we're open for any questions, if there are any.
Are there any questions? Okay, just as a note, I had been asked by one of the municipalities to sign the agreements electronically, but I could not do that until we'd brought them forward here. So that'll be taken care of tomorrow. Could I have a mover and a seconder to approve the winter maintenance agreements? Councillor Kennedy and Councillor Moffat.
Moved by Councillor Kennedy, seconded by Councillor Moffat. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council approve the winter maintenance agreements between the County of Haliburton and the local area municipalities, and that bylaws be presented to Haliburton County Council to authorize the winter maintenance agreements between the 4 local municipalities and the county.
All in favor? That's carried. Next is an approval to purchase a replacement cradle.
Yes, thank you, Warden. And I'd like to thank Sil for his initiative and work in researching this topic in preparation for 2022 budget is when we were expecting to replace this piece of equipment that's approximately 20 years old. We still found out there was going to be a significant cost increase, and also that subsequently there was a demonstrator model for the same model that we're looking at. The report lays out that information, and we're open to any questions that council may have regarding that.
Any questions? Did you have a question, Councillor Kennedy?
No, just I think it's great work on your behalf, on the department's behalf here. We just went through this at Dysart. We were actually ordering a 2023 dump truck and snowplow because of the delays. So good work on finding a demo that's available immediately, and fully support your motion recommendation. Thank you.
Councillor Burton, did you have a comment?
I actually had a question, and I think it was answered.
Okay, thank you. Could I have a mover and a seconder to approve the acquisition? Councillor DeVolen, Councillor Kennedy.
Moved by Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Kennedy. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council enter into a purchase agreement with Amico Equipment for the purchase of a demonstrator grade all / excavator for the upset amount of $524,000 plus applicable taxes. And that Haliburton County Council approve the proposed budget allocations as noted in the report, and that a bylaw be presented to Haliburton County Council to authorize an agreement with Amico Equipment for the supply of a grade all / excavator.
All in favor? That's carried. Next is a license of occupation for a new turtle wall.
Yes, thanks again, Warden and Council. We have an application in from the Land Between. Like to thank Ms. Berman from the Land Between and our own staff, Mr. Mulholland, as well as Mr. Couchet, for a number of visits to the site and working on this. Council may recall that there's been presentations and a previous turtle wall on another county road. So it's just following the same kind of standard agreement with clauses that everything's at their expense, risk, insurance, which is attached in the kind of standard agreement. So the current one seems to be successful, generally well supported by staff and residents, and staff are recommending to follow through with this further one.
Are there any questions or comments? Could I have a mover and a seconder to approve the installation? Councillor Shell and Councillor Moffat.
Moved by Councillor Shell, seconded by Councillor Moffat. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council received for information the staff report regarding the proposed installation of a turtle migration barrier wall along County Road 3, and that Haliburton County Council directs staff to enter into a license of occupation agreement between the County of Haliburton and the Land Between for the subject lands located along County Road 3 to be used for the turtle migration barrier wall. And finally, that a bylaw authorizing the license of occupation be presented for council's approval.
All in favor? That's carried.
Thank you, Warden and Council.
And thank you, gentlemen. The next item is a really heartfelt item, but it's got a bit of a downside too. As you know, in 2020, we did approve a new employee recognition policy, and normally we would be presenting those awards in person to the appropriate staff, and we just can't do that. So I will be just making note of those staff who will be receiving long-term service rewards, and offer congratulations on behalf of us all. And the appropriate directors will be actually giving them their rewards. I just did want to say how fortunate we are to have staff who remained loyal and stayed with us for so many years. It really makes a much stronger foundation for our organization, and it just makes me proud to see that we've got these number of people who've been with us for the length of time that they have. So staff that will be receiving long-term service rewards this year are Richard Ballas, who is a paramedic, and he has been with us for 20 years. Kevin Ferry, who's a stockkeeper in the Public Works Department, who's been with us for 20 years. And Kathy Howe, our receptionist, and works in the planning department as well, who has also been with us for 20 years. Next up are Amy Brome, our admin assistant for the paramedic service, who's been with us for 15 years. Jennifer Isles, paramedic, who's been with us for 15 years. Mike March, our director of IT, who's been with us for 15 years. And finally, Trish Sweeting-Hogg, paramedic, who's been with us for 15 years. Congratulations to you all, and we hope that you stick with us for more years to come. Could I have a mover and a seconder to approve the presentation of those awards? Councillor Roberts and Councillor Burton. Thank you.
Moved by Councillor Roberts, seconded by Councillor Burton. Be it resolved that the October 27th, 2021 staff report noting the County of Haliburton's long-term service award recipients be received as information by Haliburton County Council.
All in favor? That's carried. And finally, under this section is a brief discussion about whether or not we wish to make any delegations at ROMA. It seems awfully early to be making decisions about delegations at ROMA, but here we are. Thoughts about that? I just might point out that I think that the deadline would allow us to finalize any decisions on delegations at our committee of the whole meeting. I think there's just enough time to do that. So if you'd like to just keep your thinking caps on about what we might like to make a delegation about, we can make our final determination then. Councillor Moffat.
Yeah, I'll report back. The only thing I can think of is county council support of the challenges with some areas of Crown land. We have had some communication. There's the person in charge of the person we need to talk to was on secondment and is being replaced by somebody who's going to be on secondment. We haven't heard back, so there's a bit of radio silence going on at the moment. Not untypical for the ministry because they move people around quite a bit. So I'll circle back to see if that new person in charge is in the chair, is in the seat and ready to go. And if there's no success there, then maybe we pre-book a delegation regarding that issue, and we can withdraw it if that issue moves forward successfully or satisfactorily.
So just that sounds like top of mind, given some of the discussions and things we've heard in the last little while. We'll just sort of keep our thoughts open about what other delegations we might want to make, and make a final determination at our committee of the whole meeting. That's okay with everybody? So no resolution required there, Mike?
No.
Okay, next I'd like to ask if this might be appropriate time for a break for everyone before we carry on with the rest of the agenda. So it's 10:24. If we could meet at 10:40. Okay. We'll see you back here then.
And we're back live.
Okay, next on the agenda are the reports and minutes from external boards and agencies. First is the health unit. Anything to report, Councillor Roberts?
Thank you. Not really, except to say I was not able to make a meeting last Thursday due to a medical appointment. So I'm sorry for that, but we will get the minutes. But on another note, Dr. Bocking is coming up to check out the Haliburton office, and I'm meeting her for a one-on-one visit. And I'd like to, at that time, see if we can set aside a time for her to come as a delegate to County Council, and we'll just go over a few of the things. So if there's anything that county council particularly wants to hear, they can let me know. But no, I don't have anything specific to report at this time.
Okay, thank you. That, yeah, it would be great to have her come as a delegation. And maybe before you meet with her, you might touch base with Mr. Rudder, just to double check and see. I think there's a couple of things we'd like to talk about. Next is point in time. We have a set of minutes. Is there anything that you'd like to let us know, Councillor Shell?
I can't think of anything noteworthy, and you have the minutes before you, and I was actually absent for that meeting. That was shortly after my dad died, but if anybody has any questions, I could possibly answer, and if I don't have the answer, I will get them.
Any questions for Councillor Shell? Okay, on the Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus, we did have a short meeting last week. Of particular note, the paramedics from Eastern Ontario made a delegation to the Wardens Caucus, and they are going to be investigating joint purchasing across Eastern Ontario, which is always a good thing. In addition, they're going to be developing a position paper and advocating for community paramedicine programs and long-term home care, long-term care patients care to be across the province. There's been a number of municipalities that have been running test programs, and they have seen some very substantial benefits to that. One of the things in particular is the number of elders that are waiting for placement in long-term care homes, but can't go there. And our paramedics are helping to keep them safe and happy in their own homes for as long as they possibly can. We also had open and closed sessions from with EORN, and I will leave that part of the discussion to Councillor DeVolman. And speaking of Councillor DeVolman, is there anything on joint social and housing?
No, we haven't met since the last time we got together as county council. In the next month, there's a whole bunch of those things that for the city and county that I'll be reporting on.
Okay, thank you. Anything that you'd like to raise under professional recruitment, Councillor Moffat?
Just that there are interviews coming up for that position. So we look forward to reporting back on that.
Okay, thank you. And anything that we need to know about the library board? Oh, we're good. All right. Could I have a mover and a seconder to receive these reports? And the minutes from the health, no, it's from a point in time, sorry, as well as minutes from the library board. Councillor Moffat and Councillor Kennedy.
Moved by Councillor Moffat, seconded by Councillor Kennedy. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council receives for information the following correspondence. The July 27th, 2021 approved minutes from Point in Time Center for Children, Youth and Parents, and the draft minutes from the October 13th, 2021 meeting of the Haliburton County Public Library Board.
All in favor? That's carried. Under land division, we didn't meet in October, but we will be meeting as Steve Stone told us on November the 5th, and there's a number of applications coming before the committee. So other external boards and agencies, anything from Good Roads that you'd like to impart, Councillor Burton?
Yes, thank you, Warden. Just we're working on our 2022 in-person conference, which should be interesting to see how this unfolds. But it's February 27th to March 2nd, and early bird is open.
Thank you. And did you have a question, Councillor DeVolman?
Well, a comment to Councillor Burton. I see in your new role with your new publication in a glitzier form, and then the move to simplify the name Good Roads, whatever. Kudos to you and your board, whatever. Those are all good progressive things. And like I say, that physical publication looks really, really good.
Thank you.
Just didn't want to be called Ogre anymore.
No,
So it's just
that's
GER.
for sure, but now we're GER.
Grr. Any EORN updates? And I know you do have a little bit of information.
A couple of things. The CEO, David Fell of EORN Board, is leaving us for a wonderful opportunity. Kingston Hydro, which involves in Kingston far more than just hydro, but connectivity and those sort of things, a much bigger organization. He's of an age that he has, between 5 and 10 years to go to the finish line, and it was his next big mountain to climb. I would say that regretfully, that it's a byproduct of both provincial and federal governments not supporting the gig to home. So obviously we have a huge project, the mobility, that will take the next 4 to 5 years of our organization, and certainly we have a wonderful collection of senior directors there that can definitely see that through, and we're actively beginning the process to recruit another CEO for the corporation. He was there from the foundation of it. He'll be replaced, but he was a unique character, and he will definitely be greatly missed. At the same time, before this, both there's the EORN, which is kind of the non-for-profit arm that most of you are familiar with, but we also created in 2017 an ECS, a for-profit. So there's great demand across the province and the country with the expertise that's been assembled at EORN and ECS to do more consulting and guiding work with all of the programs that are coming from the feds and in particular provinces. So it's kind of a change and a metamorphosis time, very interesting times, great opportunities, because as we all know, everybody in the province, the country, and I would say the connected world, we need better services. So anyways, like I say, a time of big change. So we'll be busy with a lot of things that are not so front and center in the public view. And with every change comes an opportunity. So I'm excited how we may do something more substantial with ECS. And to the public and the municipal politicians here is that if there are for-profits created within ECS, it will flow back into EORN, so that for subsequent projects, there'll be less requirement for municipal contributions. And I think if we're successful at that, if we can continue to roll those type of initiatives, that at some point in the future that it makes enough money that there will be no further municipal contributions required would be the ultimate goal. So a sad time, but a changing and potentially a good time for change. You're muted, Warden Danielson.
Hey, thank you for that. I having worked with David for a couple of years now, I found him to be an extraordinary individual, and he certainly will be missed. But it's a wonderful opportunity for him. So best wishes to him. Councillor Burton.
Well, I'd just like to say to the group that I actually was part of the group that originally hired David, and he's been a real asset and just a huge bonus to have with EORN. And I wish him very well.
Just a couple of other details about EORN, and I hope I've got my numbers right, but part of the report that we did receive from EORN at our last EOWC meeting was that Rogers is moving ahead at a good pace with their project. Reports suggest that 90% of the towers that are planned as part of their project will be done by the end of 2022. They've completed 47 of them so far, 2 of which I think are in Haliburton. And they're actively seeking locations and municipal land, and are working on things, have been working actively with First Nations groups in consultation, as well as on archaeological projects that they've been doing. Councillor DeVolen?
No, I'm going to let our CEO Rutter speak first, and then if he's probably going to say what I was going to say, but go ahead, Mike, if you would.
Go ahead,
I just wanted to clarify that the towers, they're the uplifts. So basically it's an upgrade of the radio system on the tower, not the new towers that will be finished by the end of 2022.
Thank you for that clarification. And Councillor DeVolen?
And I would say part of the new tower creations, there's a planning approval process, which takes some time. But the other part of it is, and I say this with great regards for the process and all involved, is the duty to consult is a huge deal. In both in the previous projects of EORN and the one that we're currently embarking on, this is landmark consultation with First Nations. And I would say the previous history and then the one we're in at the moment is going amazingly well. It's time consuming. It's like I say, it is precedent setting, but the reality, there's a spirit of collaboration between staff, municipal politicians, and First Nations leadership that I think in other endeavors, other than just technology, could be replicated and could become a standard if it continues to go as well as it has today.
That's good. Good news. It's always good to get some good news. Next would be anything that you'd like to impart about poverty reduction. Any meetings there?
There has not been since we met. There will be. I do say with regret, our coordinator, Rachel Gohuli, who has done a very admirable job. And I would say in terms of information outflow beyond the pale, she's moved on to an opportunity for herself, and I'm happy for her. We're in the midst of having a replacement, but she will be missed and we'll move forward. And certainly as we meet in the future, the report that she started coming to the municipal councils will continue. And when we receive that as county council, I'll be happy to comment on it. And if there are any other questions that will flow from that, to answer them.
Thank you. I don't believe that we have anything under Indigenous Affairs. Under other business, are there any additions or amendments that need to be made to the meeting calendar? Hearing none. As a note, I think that you've all been sent a copy of the nomination form for warden for next year, just as information.
Warden Danielson.
Yes.
Sorry, if I could just, at some point, I'm not sure when this would be, but if we really need some direction about the inaugural meeting and whether or not it will continue to be a virtual inaugural, because that changes the election process and that requires some planning. I'm not sure when council would want to do that, but as I say, the sooner we get direction on that, the better for our planning purposes.
Well, I would almost think we need to have a discussion about meetings and, when we would begin to meet in person. I'm not sure if council is ready for an in-person meeting or whether we can say at this point in time that it would be virtual. Any thoughts? Councillor Kennedy.
We had a personnel meeting last week at Dysart in person, and it was so refreshing to sit across the table from each other. It stimulated a lot better discussion, and I would move that we try to move to an in-person as soon as possible.
Starting with that meeting, or just like starting with our regular meetings at
regular meetings, maybe the way to start with.
Councillor Roberts.
I concur with Councillor Kennedy. It was a great meeting, but that said, we opened the meeting to go into close to talk about identifiable individuals. So we were not having to live stream it. We were not having to do any of the things, and we were 6 people in a room. That included staff. So I don't think we can really compare. I think we should plan for a virtual meeting. But in the event that there's one nomination received, it might, who knows, it might not be as stressful as last year. I don't know, but I think we should plan in the event that because I don't see how we're going to fit and still be 6 feet apart in the council chambers. And
For an event.
not just, for an event, but also the obligation of making the meetings public. So, I don't know, we'd have to ask the IT, can we sit that far apart, everybody hear and everybody see? I don't know.
Councillor Moffat, then Burton, then Shell.
To Councillor Roberts' comments, could we be in the room in person and live stream it for the public? So limited number of people who are in the room.
Mike, go ahead.
I can, so we do, and I'll look to Mr. March to add in if he would like, but we have purchased cameras for the council chambers. We've purchased 2 additional tables. So we I think do have the ability to keep people 6 feet apart and to broadcast. It will not be a great viewing experience. I'll be really upfront. Won't be like watching high definition sports. It's one camera that will, sort of pan the entire group. But it is certainly doable.
We had an experience of that sort at the library board meeting, and it wasn't great. But it does meet the requirements of making our meetings public and viewable. Councillor Burton.
Thank you. And I do think that we should decide amongst county council if and when we are going to go in-person meetings. We haven't really had that discussion. I haven't really had it with my council. I think we put things off till November or something, but I'd like to have that discussion with county council before, and not necessarily use the inaugural as a reason.
Councillor Shell and then Councillor Royale.
Thank you, Gordon. So one of my questions then would be, if we're in person and we're 6 feet apart, are we still having to wear masks? Because if that's the case, and we're already on a camera that's spanned out and people watching, I'm not sure. It'd be very difficult, I think, for some people to possibly understand what we're saying, maybe for each of us to understand. I'm not sure how that will work. So I'm the first person to say I'm ready to get back to normal, but I also am concerned about, people being able to understand even what we're saying, if we're wearing masks and we're in this camera view that's not like we are right now, where people can see our faces.
I would almost think if we're all double vaccinated, we wouldn't need to wear masks if there was just us in the room. But that's just me. And my apologies. I said Councillor Royale is next. Just because you're one on top of the other, it might have been Councillor Kennedy, and I'm okay. Councillor Royale, sorry.
Yeah, I'm also in favor of going in, but I guess I'm more cautious. So it's not that I don't want to meet in public. It's just that in person. I mean, it's just that I think some of the things that Councillor Shell mentioned were good. So I'm the type of guy being a little more cautious that would like to start the new year out right, and then maybe wait until the first of the year to actually go full in person and deal with that. But having said that, again, it's only one opinion.
Actually, that kind of makes sense. And what I'm hearing is that that the inaugural we would have virtually. And maybe it might be an idea for us to, at our committee of the whole meeting in November, have a discussion about meetings and land on, what we really would like to do. Does that sound reasonable? Okay. Is that enough information for you, Mr. Rutter?
Absolutely.
Warden.
Yes, Councillor Roberts, then Councillor Moffat.
Thank you. So to Councillor Shell's question, so maybe Mike can check with the health unit of what that requirement is. I mean, certainly if Councillor Shell and I decide to go out for lunch, we're allowed to do that. We are choosing to sit across each other. You know, you don't have to sit at a restaurant table and be 6 feet apart. You can take your mask off once you're sitting down. So whatever the rules are with the health unit for something like this, we would make sure that we're abiding by the rules.
Of course, we wouldn't do anything.
Sure. No, I know, but we could check to be sure, because it's still never all the way clear.
Councillor Moffat.
Change of topic, going back one, if we can, to the calendar. Algonquin Highlands Projects and Priorities meeting is the 17th of November. If that needs to be added, I don't know if it does, but there you go.
Thank you. Okay, that concludes the open session of our meeting. If I could have a mover and a seconder to go into close, please. Councillor Moffat, Councillor Kennedy.
Moved by Councillor Moffat, seconded by Councillor Kennedy. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council enter in a closed session for the following reasons: personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, and labor relations or employee negotiations.
All in favor? That's carried.
And we're back live, Warden Danielson.
Thank you. So no specific report from close. You have your direction. We'll move into passing of the bylaws. So the first is bylaw number 4068 to authorize the winter maintenance agreement with Algonquin Highlands. Could I have a mover and a seconder? Sorry. Carol and Pat.
Moved by Councillor Moffat, seconded by Councillor Kennedy. Be it resolved that bylaw 4068, being a bylaw to authorize the execution of an agreement for winter maintenance services with the Township of Algonquin Highlands, be considered to be read a first, second, third time, finally passed, and the seal of the corporation be affixed.
All in favor? That's carried. A mover and a seconder for winter maintenance agreement with Dysart et al. Mover Pat and Brent.
Moved by Councillor.
Sorry, go ahead.
Moved by Councillor Kennedy, seconded by Councillor DeVolen. Be it resolved that bylaw 4069, being a bylaw to authorize the execution of an agreement for winter maintenance services with the municipality of Dysart et al., be considered to be read a first, second, third time, finally passed, and the seal of the corporation be affixed.
All in favor? And a winter maintenance services agreement with Highlands East. Carol and Cease.
Moved by Councillor Moffat, seconded by Councillor Ryle. Be it resolved that bylaw 4070, being a bylaw to authorize the execution of an agreement for winter maintenance services with the municipality of Highlands East, be considered to be read a first, second, third time, finally passed, and the seal of the corporation be affixed.
All in favor? That's carried. And finally, the winter maintenance agreement with Minden Hills. A mover and a seconder, Andrea and Carol.
Moved by Councillor Roberts, seconded by Councillor Moffat. Be it resolved that bylaw 4071, being a bylaw to authorize the execution of an agreement for winter maintenance services with the Township of Minden Hills, be considered to be read a first, second, third time, finally passed, and the seal of the corporation be affixed.
All in favor? That's carried. Next is the bylaw to authorize the agreement with Amico Equipment for a grade all. Brent and seconded by Carol.
Moved by Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Moffat. Be it resolved that bylaw 4072, being a bylaw to authorize the execution of agreement with Emico equipment for the supply of a Gradall/excavator be considered to be read a first, second, third time, finally passed, and the seal of the corporation be affixed.
All in favor? That's carried. Next is the bylaw to authorize the license of occupation agreement with the land between for turtle fences. Mover and a seconder, Lisa and Pat.
By Councillor Shell, seconded by Councillor Kennedy, be it resolved that bylaw 4073, being a bylaw to authorize the execution of a license of occupation agreement with the land between, be considered to be read a first, second, third time, finally passed, and the seal of the corporation be affixed.
All in favor? That's carried. Next is a bylaw to authorize the appointment of an alternate forestry consultant and weed inspector. Andrea and Dave.
By Councillor Roberts, seconded by Councillor Burton, be it resolved that bylaw 4074, being a bylaw to authorize the appointment of an alternate forestry consultant and weed inspector, be considered to be read a first, second, third time, finally passed, and the seal of the corporation be affixed.
All in favor? That's carried. And finally, bylaw to authorize an agreement with Dr. Muriel Charles. Mover, Carol and Pat. Thank you.
Moved by Councillor Moffat, seconded by Councillor Kennedy, be it resolved that bylaw 4075, being a bylaw to authorize the execution of an agreement with Dr. Muriel Charles, be considered to be read a first, second, third time, finally passed, and the seal of the corporation be affixed.
All in favor? That's carried. Is there any notice of motions? Hearing none. I need a mover and a seconder for the confirming bylaw. Councillor DeVolen, Councillor Royale.
Moved by Councillor DeVolen, seconded by Councillor Ryle, be it resolved that bylaw 4076, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the October 27th, 2021 meeting of Haliburton County Council, be considered to be read a first, second, third time, finally passed, and the seal of the corporation be affixed.
All in favor? That's carried. I apologize, seem to have a little trouble transitioning from closed to open. Could I have a mover and a seconder to adjourn? Councillor Kennedy and Councillor Royale. Thank you.
Moved by Councillor Kennedy, seconded by Councillor Ryle, be it resolved that the October 27th, 2019 meeting of Haliburton County Council be adjourned.
All in favor? That's carried. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
You did a great job today, Madam Warden.
Why,
Sure
thank-
did. Thank you.
Carol.
Bye.
Have a good
Take
rest.
care, guys.